Yeah, welcome back to the conversation on New Central Television. It's now time for us to switch gears from Ethiopia to Uganda, where the misuse of web in Uganda will now attract huge fines and longer jail terms. Titled the Computer Misuse Amendment Bill 2022, the amendments now await the presidential assent. It seeks to reinforce the provisions on unauthorized entry to data or knowledge, prohibit the sharing of any data referring to a baby without authorization from a mum or dad or guardian, and to ban the sending or sharing of knowledge that promotes hate speech. Based on the new regulations, one could face an advantageous fine of 16 million Ugandan shillings, which is about $4,200 or face 10 years in jail or each for unauthorized sharing of an individual's knowledge.
Now, equally offensive will likely be data shared to ridicule others. Any deceptive or malicious details about or referring to any particular person by means of a PC, and offenders may resist 7 years in jail. The provisions have precipitated an uproar, with opponents claiming that they might take away the proper use to entry data. Now we have joining us for this conversation is Jackson Wesigwa, Chairperson, National Youth Platform Uganda. We also have Simon Seyonga, is a lawyer from Kampala, Uganda, and Leila Bale, Head Editorial, Spice Media Services Limited, Homer from Homer City, Uganda. Thank you so much for joining us on the conversation.
You're welcome.
So I'll begin with you, Leila. Now, quite a number of NGOs have referred to the law as regressive and repressive. What's your reaction to the introduction of fines and jail terms for the misuse of internet?
Thank you so much. Usually when bills are passed into Parliament and the President assents to them, many parliamentarians who support the bills think they would not be held, they will not be affected as well with the same bills, just like all the other Ugandans. But I'm very sure with this bill coming into force, once the President assents to it, even MPs will fall victim of the same bill. They will also be paying fines. And within a short period of time, they will also be requesting government to bringing in more amendments to the same bill at the same time. For example, I'll give an example of the Public Order Management Act. When it was passed as a bill by Parliament, then assented by the President, many MPs who were on the government side or those leaning to the National Resistance Movement Party thought the bill would basically curtail the freedoms of assembly for those especially in the opposition, to repress them not even to speak. But the bill did not only affect the MPs on the opposition side, it even affected the doctors. We've seen teachers, even the media, just gathering. This bill automatically affects you. This act, actually, the Public Order Management Act, now the same applies to this very bill, the Computer Misuse Bill Amendment 2022. It is going to cut them as well in the shortest time possible. So for me, I think, just like what officials in the ICT ministry said, they should drop the bill and then something better. They should consult all Ugandans as a whole, because we all use social media. We all use the internet. This is a digital world to disseminate information. Not only we people in the media or politicians alone, no, even those, the doctors, even the scientists, and every human being currently uses digital technology to disseminate information, be it on Twitter, be it on WhatsApp, be it on Facebook, and all the other. So I think they would have first consulted everyone, probably a number of people in society, before coming up with this bill. Some of these bills, usually people come up with private members' bill because of their personal interest and probably the parties they lean to, the interests of their parties. Thank you.
Thank you, Leila. I'd like to bring in Simon from Kampala, and I'm glad Simon is a legal practitioner, so he could give us the legal angle to this conversation. Now, Simon, Article 29 of the Ugandan Constitution guarantees freedom of speech and expression. Is this bill on the misuse of the internet not a contradiction of Article 29 of the Constitution? And what exactly constitutes misuse of the internet? Can you unmute your device, please, Simon? Thank you.
Are you able to hear me?
Yes.
Yes, please.
Yes, please.
All right. So I'm saying that for us to make sense of the Computer Misuse Act, it must be able to pass the test under Article 43 of the Constitution, which provides for the limitations of the fundamental human rights. Now, specifically, it says that any limitation must be acceptable and demonstrably justifiable in a free and democratic state. So that is the test of whether this law passes, its necessity. So number one, when you read the long title of this law, they say the existing laws we have in Uganda have been lacking, especially in terms of punishment. They have also said that because of the progressive internet development and computer development, there was need to have advancement. But you see, there are two specific documents you want to make specific reference to. Number one was the committee report, the Committee of Information and Technology in Parliament. It made specific mention that there was no necessity of having this law because we already had other laws, such as the Data Protection Act, which were already providing. The Penal Code Act was sufficient. But also, secondly, there is precedent from the Supreme Court of Uganda, the case of Charles Onyango-Bo and Andrew Mwenda versus the Attorney General, which is the precedent on the freedom of expression in Uganda and even all over Africa. And still, the courts of law specifically mentioned that it is the fundamental human right that is fundamental, not the limitation. So what does the Computer Misuse Act do? It gives more attention to the limitation than the realization of the fundamental human right. So number one, it defeats the intention and purpose of already existing laws. Number two, it intends to water down Supreme Court judgment in the case of Andrew Mwenda. But also thirdly, it does not pass the fundamental test under Article 43. Is it acceptable and demonstrably justifiable? I'll give you legal reference to a set of laws which Uganda is a party to. Specifically under Article 45, Uganda is a party to international conventions, specifically the Siracusa Principles on the interpretation of limitations under the International Convention on Civil and Political Rights, which break down the test of acceptability and demonstrably justifiable under the law. Number one, the government must be able to demonstrate the exact necessity of the law. This has not been demonstrated. I like what my sister said. You can look at what happened with the Public Order and Management Act. The intention was political curtailment. Now, because of the strong political wave that swept Uganda in 2021, you saw that social media and internet use were the fundamentals. So my quick interpretation of the law is that its applicability is intended to curtail political freedoms.
I'd like to pick Jackson Mswiga to join us for this conversation right now. Where you last picked off now, you mentioned it being politically motivated, and the NGOs and even the opposition parties in Uganda have also said that cyber laws in Uganda are meant to attack the opposition and form as a deterrent, or rather form as curbing freedom of speech in Uganda. What are your thoughts on this? Is this an attack on the youth? Is this an attack on freedom of speech in Uganda, Jackson?
I'm so happy that my friend Simon has explained the legality of this bill. And he's citing very, very crucial cases, especially that case of Charles Onyango-Bo, where the Supreme Court made a decision on how this law on misuse of computer should be, interpreted. But to me, I will not drill much into the law, since Simon has explained that part of it. I wanted to go into the political part of it because, to me, this is basically aimed at ensuring that information sharing is limited. And this is partly because we've seen in the past 2-3 years, most of these, serious government interventions in terms of limiting information sharing. For example, in 2019, novelist and a poet, Dr. Stella Nyanzi, was arrested for sharing information on social media for allegedly abusing the president and his son on social media. He was convicted and sentenced to 18 months in prison, but good enough, The Court of Appeal quashed that sentence and said there was no evidence, clear evidence to show that indeed she had committed, that crime. But subsequently, we've seen Kakwenza Bichirabasaija, who is now a fugitive in Germany. He had to run after being convicted, after being arrested and detained for, spreading false information. Oh.
And tortured also. Go ahead, Jackson.
So we've had individuals being arrested for spreading information, especially about the president or big government officials. And so to me, this Computer Misuse Act, I think it's still a bill because it hasn't yet been assented on by the president.
Okay.
It's not meant to...
Jackson, we could go on and on, but from what you're saying now, these laws are prohibiting freedom of speech going on in Uganda. You talked about so many people who have been arrested for talking about the president. Unfortunately,